For 40 years, beginning in 1949, my favorite paperback cover artist ever, James Avati, created hundreds of stunning paintings that poured acetylene on the already incandescent paperback culture of the 1950s and 60s. Though you won't see Avati's work hanging on the walls of the Met or MoMA, the paperbacks he illustrated tended to sell extraordinarily well, so his powerful and often moving paintings were seen and loved by tens of millions of people, most of whom had no idea even of Avati's name. In this video, I take advantage of 4K and high-resolution images using Avati's original paintings were available in a tour through the wonder world of the truly great painter, James Avati. Avati was the great painter of the decisive moment, that instant of revelation and recognition when something significant about characters and plot revealed itself in a single image. The Decisive Moment also happens to be the title of photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson's influential and revered 1952 collection of photographs. Bresson writes in The Decisive Moment, "I prowled the streets all day, ready to pounce, determined to trap the truth of life, to preserve life in the act of living, to seize in the confines of one single image the whole essence of some situation in the process of unfolding before my eyes." The artists who created the covers for first pulp magazines and then paperbacks intuitively grasped something about the Decisive Moment long before Bresson's book. After all, their job was to create an image that stood out from all the others on the rack or display case, capture a plausible moment in the exchange of glances and gestures and backdrop that hints at a distilled snapshot of a dramatic narrative, and you've already created an immersive moment drawing the customer in, and in a sense, allowing them a foretaste of reading the book before they've even turned to the first page. No one captured that decisive moment better than James Avati. Often, Avati began a work not with paint, but with a camera, carefully choreographing some core scene or theme of the book. Move your arm a little to the left, change your expression. You are lovesick and hungry, but perhaps impatient to irritation and a little sad too. Move your knee up, a little more cleavage, please. That's perfect. As with any photograph, follow the glances and the gazing at play within the image, and you've already moved far into the social drama unfolding. But if the goal is to create an instant bond between characters and prospective reader, what better than have a character stare directly at the potential purchaser? The implied reciprocity of that stare sent customers in the millions, new book in hand, straight to the cashier. Just look what James Avati does with the gaze or stare. No cover artist accomplished this ramped-up exchange of glances between character and viewers better than James Avati, and it paid off in paperbacks that would break sales records year after year. And perhaps most of all, it made for readers who, even before encountering the first line of a book, were already primed and immersed in the story for the plunge into the transporting power of words. Publisher of 25-cent paperbacks, Richard Sherman, in 1955's The 7-Year Itch, has a hilarious exchange with a colleague where he rejects the mock-up for Louisa May Alcott's Little Women because he wants to see more skin, as if lowering the bust line is all that matters. His edit of the image might help drive sales, but when a rack of paperbacks typically has 100 titles, there are a lot of choices, so a cover image has to say, "Choose me," and say it quickly and forcefully by engaging the prospective customer in emotional terms. And James Avati was an absolute master of viewer engagement. Whether it's Faulkner, or James T. Farrell, or Ayn Rand, or Frederick Brown, or James Cain, or Mickey Spillane, Avati had a way to find an image that cut to the very heart of the story and to find a visual language to express it in a way that is a magnet to the viewer. He did dozens of Mickey Spillane covers, and their dark, edgy, and irresistible erotics, coupled with an implied sense of menace, drove the sales of I, the Jury in almost every Spillane book that followed to unprecedented levels right out of the gate. His work with Erskine Caldwell not only illustrated but enriched the text until his images were a vital part of the growing Caldwell universe. Avati was always willing to engage the psychological complexity of his characters. Holden Caulfield in J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye. Temple Drake in Faulkner's Sanctuary. John Howard Sharp and Juana in James M. Cain's Serenade. But let's turn to a remarkable cover of Stuart Engstrand's Beyond the Forest to look at the first way Avati excels in engaging the prospective purchaser of the book. It's effective. It draws you in. Her eyes meeting your eyes. That reciprocity on a quarter paperback might just seal the deal. When Beyond the Forest was turned into a movie, there was only one person on Earth who could compete with her eyes. Sure enough, Bette Davis got the part. Nobody's as good as Betty when she's bad. This woman's just been looking at herself in her compact, so intimate, and then the turn of the head, and the meeting of her eyes with yours. And here we are, in the mid-1950s, and Wara's outfit is stunningly stylish and edgy in an arty, beat, hip kind of way. I love it. She looks like she belongs at a beatnik party with drums and lots of wine and Ginsberg intoning, "I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the machinery of night," and that tight skirt and sash belt. And then, her eyes. Another strength of Avati was capturing the decisive moment, the combination of physical pose and gesture and interaction that somehow tells the whole story. In this, his use of photography and the posing of models in a highly deliberate way that reminds me of nothing so much as a brilliant choreographer always striving to create the decisive moment, a single instance that in terms of character interaction, gesture and total posing, and engagement with the viewer creates a scene fraught with emotional resonance. The camera was an essential part of this, and his models have spoken of how carefully he would coach emotions and gestures. No, your hand should be a bit more open, exposed, vulnerable. Another defining trait of James Avati is that, unlike some of his colleagues, he is attentive to the core truths of the books he illustrates, combining specific elements in the book to capture something vital, a kind of core poetic truth of the novel, expressed visually. In this painting, there's something so deeply pensive about the woman, inward, worrisome, brooding. William Faulkner's Wild Palms was published in 1939, and the woman is Charlotte Rittenmeyer, who had left her prosperous husband to run away with Harry Wilborn, an impoverished and virginal medical intern finishing his training at a hospital. She gets pregnant on the way, and Charlotte and Harry wind up after travels on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, running out of money and living in a shack they had rented from a landlord who is also a doctor. Charlotte is described as the dark-haired woman whose skin was drawn thin over prominent cheekbones and heavy jaw. The doctor called it sullen at first, and then he called it afraid. And Avati gets that just right. Her face does display that emotional duck-rabbit ambiguity between sullen and fear. But then, unlike the describing text, we catch her just as Harry Wilburn is walking up. But of course, with the outlooking gaze, it is we, the viewer, and hopefully the reader, who she is glancing up at, seeing, and yet not seeing, with the inward brooding and that illimitable expression. No spoilers here, but Charlotte and Harry are playing a kind of endgame. She's pregnant with a child they won't raise, and the fierce erotic incandescence that pulled them together has transformed into a foreclosed prospect, a ramshackle shotgun shack, and resources dwindling ever toward zero. A pity beyond all telling is hid in the heart of love, is what Yeats said, and this one's headed towards the pyre. This time, we just see Charlotte, but in other work, he will pull Harry into the scene, and Avati will choose to represent the erotic pull and destructive push relationship moment again and again and again in illustrations of other books. That moment where the coexistence of some intense erotic bonding between partners and simultaneously a pulling of both people away in utterly different directions is the driving force of so many books. What Avati will represent is in part the post-coital brooding of what Shakespeare describes as having, and in quest to have extreme and prove the very woe before a joy proposed behind a dream. But you get a sense that the bonds will persist, however fierce the centrifugal forces that would lead each party to be headed toward the door. Clasp and sunder and do the coupler's will with a wrong set of partners, then watch things crash as the erotic frenzy fuels a kind of relational endgame, all the time remaining intimate strangers. Stranger in town. We are strangers. And we are strangers still. These are troubled relationships, that bond, that often crazy, often counter-logical and destructive erotic bond. Call it the Ballad of Sexual Dependency. All these are titles from the mid-50s, so let's jump ahead to the early 1980s, to a body of work that provides a fascinating mirror to these paintings and book covers. I'm taking the phrase Ballad of Sexual Dependency from the first book by the artist Nan Golden. What Golden did was to unflinchingly document the 1980s lives of herself and their friends and their friends' friends and their changing relationships in New York City. It was art times, and it was drug times, and it was plunge into the wonders of Eros with the wrong set of partners, or maybe the right set, and then watch things crash as the erotic frenzy fuels a sort of relational endgame, all the time remaining intimate strangers. In 1983, the photographer took a slideshow of personal photographs on tour of campuses, libraries, bookstores, and even cafes. It was called The Ballad of Sexual Dependency. It was an electrifying thing to see, and initial audiences were mesmerized by Golden's peeling back and exposing the secret theater and obsessions and clearly destructive erotic pulls of her own life. It was quite a mirror to all of us in the sense of Lou Reed, Velvet Underground kind of way. And Avati was clearly fascinated by that push-pull erotic destruction space in his own work 30 years earlier. Okay, I think I will finish with James Avati's astonishing cover painting for Christopher Isherwood's Goodbye to Berlin, which, in addition to being a fabulous book, inspired the film Cabaret. So goodbye to Berlin, and goodbye to you, and thank you for watching, and if you like this, please click and subscribe.